How about now? Well, I don't know why it didn't work there, but it's working now. Good morning, everybody. Dr. Josh here, and this is Digital Hammurabi. Good to have you with us. We're going to do a little Q&A today because we, I think, have reached 12,000. I did this a little prematurely, I suppose. We were at something like 11,996. Yeah, we're still there. So we're still 4 away. So I guess we could hit the 12,000 while we're doing this stream. But I wanted to come on. I haven't done anything like this in a little bit. Things have been pretty busy. I'll give you guys a quick update on that. Before we get into the Q&A, for those of you that are watching, afterwards I will try to remember, if you guys can remind me in the live chat, to timestamp the different questions, like I've seen other people do in the streams. Actually, I think that's really helpful. So, right. So for those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. Again, Dr. Josh, my wife, Megan, is really the brains and the brawn behind the channel. She is unfortunately upstairs, not feeling terribly well. The baby's also not feeling all that great. So they're upstairs sleeping, and I thought, well, I'll just go live and see if I can't answer some questions. So, okay. So Megan has been, if you notice, she's been working really hard on the Sumerian grammar. So for those of you that are participating in the Sumerian class using the videos online on our channel, the book is done. We sent it off to the printer. It takes, I think, 72 hours for everything to get processed, and as far as I understand, we should be able to order the book within the next day or so. So Megan will definitely be coming on to update everybody, but it'll be on Amazon. There'll be a link to Amazon on our, I'm sure, on the channel and on our website. But for those of you that don't know, if you're interested in taking learning ancient Sumerian, there are some amazing scholars, Sumerologists, Assyriologists, that have put out mind-blowing grammars on Sumerian, on the Sumerian language. In my opinion, and it may just be because I'm not, a brilliant person, they're very difficult to use on your own if you don't already know the language. So what I wanted to do, and that includes, there's a new grammar by Zayomi, Gabor Zayomi, which is phenomenal. Foxfog has one. Hayes has one that I think he just redid. I still find them, I don't know that they're meant for, or that they're good for somebody coming in that isn't going to be working in tandem with an Assyriologist or in a classroom. I think it's very difficult. So we wanted to put a grammar together that specifically filled that gap. So it's the grammar's, I think, just under 300 pages, but it's written in a very down-to-earth, writing style. It has jokes in it, which, of course, all of you know I'm incredibly funny. So, that comes into the writing. Megan has spent a lot of time putting good exercises together. She's hand-drawn tablets so that you can use the cuneiform, use your new cuneiform skills. She's put a lot of work into it. And I actually think it's going to be really, really good. There's a very thorough answer key, which goes through not just what the answers are, but explains the grammatical features and how things go together. So actually, I think it's going to be a really useful tool. So that should be coming out. I would say ready to order in the next couple days. I hope so. Then I have finished the slavery book, the book on slavery in the ancient Near East and the Hebrew Bible, and we will start I'll probably give Megan a break from the editing process, and I've already gone through it a couple of times, but just to make sure that it's meets the format. But we're publishing it, so it's a digital Hammurabi publication, which is really cool. And yeah, so that one in the next couple of months should also go up. Excuse me. I've also been feeling a bit under the weather, so I apologize if I sound a little stuffed up. So that is going on. We just put out the fourth Daniel video. It's the second Daniel video in the historical problems. That's really confusing. I'm doing a video series, if you don't know, on the dating of the book of Daniel. Why is it that scholars think that it's dated to the 2nd century as opposed to the 6th? So I did a video summarizing the data in some detail on the Aramaic language, the linguistic data from the Aramaic, then from the Hebrew in the second video. And then I was going to do just a third video on the way that we use the historical data presented in the book of Daniel to date it to the 2nd century. I realized very quickly that a 25 or 30 page single spaced script produced very, very long videos, and so I decided to break it up into a 3-part series. So the third video is broken up into 3 parts, and the second part just came out. It by itself is 35 minutes long, and it's scripted, full of information. But do check them out. I think it's actually good. The third video, so the first video in that history sequence kind of gives a backdrop to the history of the period, talks about the way Daniel presents the history in general, not really pointing out the problems with it, but just trying to give a background. The second video goes into the problems, for example, with Belshazzar. It talks about the confusion of Nabonidus with Nebuchadnezzar. It also talks about some of the problems of the dating. And the third video that will be coming out, the script is done. I just have to record it and I put the video together. Is going to talk about Darius the Mede. We'll talk about we'll touch on some aspects of Daniel 9, but sort of in the bigger picture of how the visions of 7 through 12, how they run their courses. And we're primarily focusing on what is the termination point. What is it that these visions are culminating? What is the climax? Or maybe a better way to say it is before the kingdom of God comes in. What is it that is the sort of the last acts? What are the last acts of the earthly ruler that is working against God's purposes? So looking at that in chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, and then 10 through 12, particularly chapter 11. Actually, I think is really useful. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about, how those things, that will, I guess, be a good segue into how those things lead us to a 2nd century date. So it should be good. After that, I know that Megan is talking about doing a end of the year wrap up of stream for the channel, and I think she's going to talk a little bit about the kids channel that's getting ready to go live. And some of the other things that are coming up. So I think it's going to be good. I spend several evenings a week sort of decompressing on Skylar's channel. So if you haven't subbed to the Skylar Fiction Show, I would encourage you to go do that. It's a lot of fun. That's sort of where we kick back a little more and enjoy ourselves, but I find that to be incredibly relaxing. This, having to lead the stream and to keep it going, it's a little stressful for me. But anyway, so that's my kind of introduction. Hopefully some questions have come in. Let me scroll back up. If you do have a question, particularly, I've lot of stuff going on Twitter. If you don't follow us on Twitter, see if I can remember this. Megan is Digi at Digi_Hammurabi. I am DJ Hammurabi1, I think. But we try to keep active on Twitter when we can. Megan is much better at it than I am. But there's a lot of stuff that several things have gone on in Twitter. So if you have questions about that, questions about some of this Daniel stuff that's come up, if you have questions about slavery, if you have questions about really anything that we've talked about either here or on Skylar's show, I mean, I don't know that I'll have answers, but I will give it a shot. So, all right, let's see. So Yami Yamizuki, could the book of Job be interpreted as actually encouraging us to question God rather than engaging in blind apologetics? Because Job was rewarded after questioning God. This is a good question. Job's fun. I know we've talked about it a little bit on Skylar's channel. We reviewed, I think we got through all of Inspiring Philosophy's video on Job, who took a different approach that I disagree with to the text. So to just kind of summarize for people maybe that don't know about Job, and I'm not an expert on Job. I didn't write my dissertation on it or anything. There are people that I'm sure I know are far more well-versed. Klein's has a really good 3-part commentary on the book of Job. I think it's David Klein's in the Word Biblical Commentary series. Who else? Chung Leong Seao has a really nice commentary. I don't remember what this series is. It's just chapters, I think 1 to 16, but it's this thick. Michael Brown just came out with maybe a year ago, maybe less, probably less, 6 months ago, came out with a commentary on Job. I haven't looked at it yet. Anyway, a lot of really good people have written on Job. But to kind of give you the backdrop, Job is a story about a man who, in the beginning of the text goes to great lengths to say that he is a righteous man. He is upright in the eyes of God. God actually says, have you considered my servant Job? He's righteous. He does what is right. So the text has that as its, I guess, basic premise. Its backdrop is that Job is a righteous man. And chapter 1 talks about all the great blessings that he has. And then there's a scene where God is in heaven and the adversary, the Satan, whatever you want to say, probably not a personal name there, but anyway, it's not really relevant, comes before God and says, the only reason that Job is worshiping you is because you've created this great hedge around him and he's really blessed. And, so God says, all right, do what you will, but you can't hurt him, right? You can't hurt him. So Job loses his family, loses all his goods, all his wealth, everything. Then, of course, the scene is set again, and God says, hey, look, he still hasn't turned his back on me, hasn't cursed me. And Satan says, because you haven't afflicted him personally. And so God gives him leave to go and to, hurt him personally. He gets all these boils. And anyway, it's at that point that 3 friends come to visit him, and they are so shocked at what they see. They sit for 7 days without saying anything to him. And then they engage with him in this sort of discourse, taking turns. It's a beautiful literary piece, by the way, Job. And they're basically arguing different positions. They're arguing different nuances of positions that basically focus on the principle of retribution. So if you do good, good things will happen. If you do bad, bad things will happen. So Job is coming back at this and saying, look, I'm a righteous person. I have not done these things that you're accusing me of to deserve this punishment. This is unfair. I don't deserve this. And ultimately, he calls on God, like in a legal sense, to come down and um, to essentially tell him what he's done, because there's no way to convince these friends of his that he is innocent. You know, so he calls on him to come down and to ostensibly either say, look, here's this hidden thing that you don't know about that you've done, or vindicating Job and saying, no, you haven't done anything. And it's interesting because, you know, as conversations go on, there's another guy that comes in, but then ultimately God comes down and God engages with Job. And he doesn't say, you've done right, you've done wrong. He says, who are you to question me? Where were you when I did all of these things, when I laid the foundations of the earth, when I did all these miraculous things, when I created the world and I set everything in motion? I controlled these creatures. And can you do these things? Go ahead if you can. You know, and Job essentially says twice in the text, on two different occasions, when he replies to God, I've spoken out of turn, right? I shut my mouth at you. And so it's interesting the way that it resolves itself. But ultimately, God comes back in chapter 42 and says to the three friends, you have spoken wrongly about me. Job has spoken correctly about me. Therefore, Job is going to, pray for you and offer a sacrifice and everything. And, I'll overlook these things. And then Job is blessed there at the end of chapter 42. He's, blessed with all the things that he lost, much more so, which is interesting because it seems like it goes back against the general nature of the meat of the text, right? Like this principle of retribution is the thing that's under discussion. It's under analysis, and at the end, a retribution is not. I think that's what the text is sort of going against, is this idea that you do well, you get blessed, you do, evil, you get cursed. That's the thing that it's wrestling with. But then in the end, I mean, it's sort of what happens. So it's an interesting piece. So that's the backdrop. So to answer the question, could the book of Job be interpreted as actually encouraging us to question God rather than engaging in blind apologetics? I would say I don't know that it's yes and no, in the sense that if you look at how God responds to Job for questioning, it's a where were you, where were you, where were you? But then in the end, Job is the one that is said to have spoken correctly about God. So I would say, yeah, the thrust of the book, I think, is wrestling with this difficulty that we all see in life. And if we hold to a theistic position, why is it that why is it that the gods or God, who is in control, the God that I serve, how is it that God allows bad things to happen to me, who's righteous or pious, whatever, and yet the guy that's doing, or the woman that's doing these horrible things out here, they're living the good life? How does this happen? So yeah, that's what I would say. Another question by Yami Yamazuki. Also, speaking of apologetics, is one way allowed to use the suggestions and recommendations thread on the Discord to promote all his apologetics videos, because he is doing that? I don't think that's the place for that. I feel awful about saying this. I very rarely get onto Discord, and it's just hard to find time to do that sort of thing, and then to remember to do it. So yeah, that's probably a question for Megan. I don't know how it's set up. We have mods. I mean, I don't know if you're. I think we have mods on that. So I'll let my. I'll definitely. I think we trust the mods to handle that. If that doesn't seem like that's the right thing to be doing, then certainly, um, it shouldn't be done. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. Again, if you have questions, please tag me. Please tag me at Digital Hammurabi, and because I tend to not see other questions. Thank you, Richard, for the congratulations. Oops, I'll just skip down. Okay. Injustice System 27. Good morning, Dr. Josh. Just wondering if you or Megan had found a good ancient Near East mythology book for kids, or if you were planning on producing one in the future. Thank you for your work. I remember Megan looking for something like that at one point. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I do know that Megan was working at one point on like a kid's coloring book, but maybe that was part of a bigger project. I will ask her when she wakes up. That's a good question. If not, I mean, it definitely needs to be put together. Tim Smith, when do you think the current Hebrew Bible or Torah was compiled? Nice, easy question. Over time, yeah, that's a very it's a very complicated question. I have a video that I put out called "Piecing Together the Pentateuch," where I talk about some of the major theories of redaction, compilation, source theories. Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of the going thought is I don't know. I mean, there's so many good people on different sides of that. Certainly the 7th century, looking at the time of Josiah for putting together the book of Deuteronomy, but that's certainly not in stone, I guess. There are obviously lots of redactions, I think, that took place during the Persian period. Yeah, that's complicated. I don't even know how I would go about. Certainly we have yeah, that's a very difficult text. Sorry, I'm not giving a good answer here. So things that you have to wrestle with that, looking at, for example, the Septuagint, trying to figure out what was the Vorlage, the underlying Hebrew text that the Septuagint used for the book of Jeremiah. How it differs from the Masoretic text, and you see differences in chapter order and different lengths of sections, and so it's not in any way straightforward. So I tend to think, and again, not my field of specialization. Pentateuchal studies, it's not my field of specialization. I can make, obviously, if you go to that video, in the description, I have a lot. I have a select bibliography that I put together to give people sort of a way into that topic. You can look at Joel Baden or Baden. I can't remember how he pronounces his last name. John Collins, in his most recent edition of his Introduction of the Hebrew Bible, has a great section in the beginning that, again, just lays the groundwork and then has some good bibliographic sources that you can look at. But yeah, that's probably what I would say. I tend to be a little later in my thoughts, but that's my opinion is probably not the one to go with on that topic. I tend to think that a lot of the stories in the biblical texts are exilic, post-exilic, but there obviously is. I mean, that's just sort of a general. There are obviously texts that are. I say obviously. I think they're pre-exilic, but yeah, the final compilation, I'm not sure. Pinball 1970. Is this the only place where the devil kills anyone? Also, is this connected to apocalyptic thinking in the Old Testament beginning of it? Oh, I see. So that's complicated. The first question is complicated because it's sort of assuming that the that personification or that the not personification, but the use of Hasatan there is like thinking of the devil in that sense. I have not read all the secondary literature on that that back and forth. I suspect that it's not. You tend to as you get later on in the Second Temple period, you tend to see that developing a little more. I was telling Skylar we should probably do a study on that. I'd have to do some reading before I did, though. Is it apocalyptic? I wouldn't say so, strictly speaking, only because from an apocalyptic standpoint, you have, there was back in the 70s, I think it was, John Collins held a conference called, it was published in Samea 14. Don't ask me why I remember that. But they kind of got together and discussed all the apocalyptic texts, particularly from the Second Temple period, but also, from later. And anyway, and they came up with a working definition of what apocalyptic literature is. And I would say that, from that perspective, probably not Job, only because generally speaking, you have, an angelic messenger that's coming and revealing something and then interpreting it. And then you have visions of the end time, or you have an otherworldly trip that takes place. I mean, while I say all this, it might just be a good idea. In fact, I think that's my plan, if I remember correctly, after I finish this last Daniel video, to go into apocalyptic genre and just kind of give an introduction to it so that we can see it. I know we started reading through First Enoch here on the channel in our last book club, so you can go check that out if you want. We talk about apocalyptic a little bit there. But now, I mean, I would say that, Daniel is a good example of apocalyptic genre, particularly the visions 7 to 12. Enoch, Sibylline oracles. I mean, you have a lot of apocalyptic literature that sort of falls into that. You do have some earlier stuff, but yeah, I would say Job probably not. But that's a good question because there's an otherworldly. I can see why you would think that, and I could be wrong, obviously. There's an otherworldly scene, like a heavenly scene. The problem is that usually you have an earthly being going into that heavenly realm to see that, to do that otherworldly journey so that they can impart knowledge back. That's what I would say is probably the distinction to be made there. Every time I scroll down, it seems to keep going further than I want. Okay, let's see. So Grayback asks, hey, did that not pleasant guy from What Do You Meme answer your slavery video? I haven't seen anything yet. I know that several months ago, somebody questioned, I think his name's John from What Do You Meme, to ask if he was going to respond, and he said that he found my videos supremely boring, which, yeah, maybe the topic, look, I am well aware that there are better ways for me to present this data, and we are trying, but some of this stuff ends up being just sort of, it can be kind of dry, but yeah, I don't think I've seen anything yet. Yummy Yamizuki says the Discord has literally only one mod. Okay. I don't know. I don't know how to. I will tell Megan. I will let her know. Thank you. So, boy, I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Alkyl dimethyl benzyl ammonium chloride. I was speaking to a rabbi recently about about prophecy, and he laughed and said the prophets weren't really trying to tell the future, but to reorient the people's minds. Have you heard this? Yeah, absolutely. So there are definitely different aspects of prophecy. A good evangelical article that you could read on this, or people out here could read on this, and there are obviously lots and lots of things written on prophecy, but Robert Chisholm wrote an article. It was on Ezekiel. It wasn't on Ezekiel strictly. It was on, what is the title? It's contingent. It's on prophecies of contingency, or it's got contingency in the title. Watch, it'll probably pop up here in the live chat. But he wrote an article on contingent prophecies, and he used Ezekiel 26 as an example of what he thinks is a contingent prophecy. So if you think about Jonah and Nineveh, Jonah went and prophesied to the people at Nineveh that 40 days and place was going to be destroyed. So it's a futuristic prediction of what's going to happen in 40 days. And the people repented, right? They changed, and so God relented, right? Changed his mind. And that contingent aspect of the prophecy where, I'm telling you what's going to happen, it's almost as if he's saying, I'm telling you what's going to happen if you don't change your ways. And so he brings that into Ezekiel 26. I disagree with the position, by the way, but I think he articulates it reasonably well, where he says that we don't know what it is that the king, for example, in Tyre did to get God to change his mind. But something happened where that prophecy of total destruction against Tyre was contingent. It was a contingent prophecy, and God changed his mind and relented. And that's why you see in chapter 29, things have changed, and now Nebuchadnezzar is going to get as his pay, plunder from Egypt. And I think he even says in the article, and this would also apply to Egypt because Nebuchadnezzar didn't take Egypt either. And he says, we can only assume, maybe, I can't remember how he worded it, but it was essentially, we can assume that Egypt changed as well, relented as well. So I think it's something that's unfalsifiable in that sense. Maybe not unfalsifiable, but I don't know how one would falsify that, because I think there's you could say any of these things where a prophecy is made, a prediction is made, and then it doesn't come true, that one could say, well, something must have happened to change God's mind, and then that solves the problem. But that's obviously a work, and you definitely see that, right? I think you definitely see it in Jonah. You definitely see it. The prophets are there to try to realign. I mean, I think is that the word that was used? I think that's a really good, or reorient. Yeah. Reorient the people. They're going astray, and the prophet's there to bring them back. And you see this in Leviticus 26, in Deuteronomy 28. It's sort of laying out what's going to happen if you obey, if you disobey. These are the things that are going to take place. So yeah, I think that's definitely reasonable. I don't think that you can't, in my opinion, you can't categorize prophecy all under one category. There are definitely different aspects to it, and so it's more complicated than that. But Harley Wykes, what do you think of Francesca Stavrakopoulou? Is that right? Stavrakopoulou's idea that ancient Judaic religion was used to be one where child sacrifice was practiced. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. I don't know when Stavrakopoulou, I don't know when she wrote, but we did an interview with Dr. Heath Turrell. Right? Heath taught me Akkadian when I first got to Hopkins. I know Heath really well. But he wrote a book. He wrote his dissertation on child sacrifice in ancient Israel. And then, of course, he published it several years later. But it's published, I think Eisenbraun's published it, if I remember that correctly. But you can definitely get that. And, he goes through a solid history of research, obviously, for what the different positions have been and are. And then I think he lays out a very good case for Israelite child sacrifice. And we also have a video. I actually think it was linked earlier in this in the stream or in the side chat. So yeah. Oopsie poopsie. Why do you think so many people ignore where the Bible actually comes from? Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, I think for many different reasons. The one that I see most often tends to be from somebody who would ascribe to like a fundamentalist position. So I don't know that they would ignore, oftentimes they do. I think for a lot of people it was for me anyway, it's very scary. You're raised to believe a certain way about a biblical text. And when you think of where it actually comes from, you can take that a number of directions. Does it come from, this rich cultural diversity of, the ancient Near East, and it utilizes any number of motifs and literary texts, utilizing intertextuality or engaging in intertextuality, all the way down to, does it come from a divine source, and I think that a lot of times it's a scary thing to think, if this is not a divine text, or if this text hasn't come down to me in the way that I was raised to think that it came down to me. I see this in a lot of people. They'll stop looking at the data. They'll stay with safe sources that aren't going to talk about the difficulties, let's say, in the Hebrew Bible, the formation of the Pentateuch, or difficult texts like the Book of Daniel or Ezekiel 26, or they'll stay with sources that either won't get into those things or will sort of gloss over them in a sense. And I think just because it can be scary, and it's safer, I suppose. And that's definitely the direction that initially I wanted to go. I just I don't want to deal with these potential difficulties, of course, unless it's in a very controlled environment where, like an apologetics environment. So anyway, yeah, it's a good question. Tim Smith, thank you for your honest answer. I knew it was a tough question. That's why I asked. Well, you're welcome. I apologize to everybody if a question comes up and you're hoping for a better answer and I don't have one. Ultra Testosterone, do you think the Romans created Christianity like George Atwill says? It's not my period of specialization. From what I know, I would say no, but I don't know that I have any answer based on that particular George Atwill. I haven't know anything about it. Sorry. Please stop skipping down. Let's see. Pine Snake. Before the Old Testament was written, Are there examples of laws, such as not committing murder, coming from prior civilizations with a secular means of passing them and implementation? Yeah, absolutely. So, the book that I'm we're publishing on slavery goes into sort of ancient Near Eastern legal background very, very briefly. But we have, many extant cuneiform tablets, like the actual original cuneiform tablets that are legal texts, thousands and thousands of them. But you have, ancient law codes. They're not really codes, but whatever. The most famous, I think, being the Code of Hammurabi from the 18th century BCE. But yeah, the way they thought about law was different. And sometimes people make a big deal out of that. For interesting reasons, they make a big deal out of that. And I don't necessarily know why. Or I think I know why, but I don't. It's sort of a non sequitur, but nonetheless. So the way they thought about law was very different. And I'm not a legal specialist. Please, I'm not a legal specialist. If you want to read a really good book, and I always recommend this, seems to be picked up by everybody now to recommend it, but that's great. That's great. Raymond Westbrook edited in 2003, maybe. I can never remember. And I can't actually remember the specific name, but it's Ancient Near Eastern Law or Law in the Ancient Near East or something. But he brought together, he was an Ancient Near Eastern specialist, and he was an Assyriologist, brilliant Assyriologist up at Hopkins, died right as I got there. It was really, really sad. He brought together some of the best in the field, in the various fields of ancient Near Eastern studies, and had them, asked them to write sort of, articles that deal with various aspects of law in their, not only in the different regions, a section on Egypt, section on Hatti, section on Israel, section on, whatever, Mesopotamia, but throughout the different periods. So, you have early dynastic Mesopotamia, you have Old Babylonian, Middle Babylonian, so on. So yeah, it's a fantastic volume. It's 2 volumes. To sort of familiarize yourself with that. Also, if you email me digital, by the way, if anybody has specific questions like this, I'm not the greatest at checking email either, but I try. If you have very specific questions, like particularly about bibliographic sources that I mention here, digitalhammurabi@gmail.com. And, if you say, what was the name of that book that you were referencing, I'm usually pretty good about getting back on those. Cards on the table. If you email me and ask me a question that's going to involve me doing a lot of research, it's probably going to induce an awful lot of anxiety in me, and I might have really good intentions of trying to do the work, but it's just tough to find time. So, yeah. Anyway, okay. Ultra testosterone. What do you think about Bart Ehrmann's take on the origins of Christianity? Another good question. Again, the New Testament is not my field of specialization. Bart Ehrmann is a solid scholar. I'm sorry, I don't care what anybody says. Obviously, all scholars in any field, once you get past sort of the fundamentals in the field, they begin to disagree. And there's some people that would say Dr. Ehrmann, focuses on certain things for hype. Nonetheless, on the fundamentals, I don't think that you get, I don't think there are many people that would, he's just a solid scholar. And of course I don't, anyway, it's not my field. So I'm probably not the person to ask about that. But as I've asked some people that are in the field, just generally speaking, about Dr. Ehrman, and they, he's a solid scholar. So, and no surprise. I mean, it's tough to get where he is without being one. So, Bart Ehrmann is saying that Jesus never made his own religion and was just an offshoot of Judaism. He says the original apostles didn't believe in the Trinity or the virgin birth either. That wouldn't surprise me. Again, not my area of specialization, but that would not surprise me. Thank you. Man, how do you pronounce that? Pavelnadolsky. Okay. Sorry if I butchered that. Speaking of apocalyptic biblical literature, do you know of any accessible books or videos on the origins history of the Book of Enoch? Yeah. It's I wouldn't, it's not like an introductory book. You know what though? There are a couple. Both are put out by Nicholsburg. What's his name? Sorry, I'm just popping open my Kindle app here. But he wrote a book. It's a translation of First Enoch that he did. It's pretty recent too. Where in the world is Kindle? There it is. Okay. So yeah, it's in the Hermeneia translation series. Let me get back to the cover. It is by George Nicholsburg and James Vanderkam, two pretty big names in the field. But it's First Enoch, the Hermeneia translation, Fortress Press. But he has, a good introductory section where he talks about that. But then he has obviously an incredibly thorough commentary on First Enoch, 2 volumes in the Hermeneia series. I'd have to look and see if the remainder of anyway. But yeah, so Nicholsburg has a phenomenal commentary, very thorough, in the Hermeneia series, 2 volumes. I have them on my shelf. They're fantastic. So yeah, that would deal with that. Good question. Iron Charioteer, is the reason why they can't find any historical characters such as Moses, David, Solomon, etc. is because they are looking in the wrong place? Should they be looking at Egyptian origin? Okay, so like for example, the name Moses, everybody, there's like a faux etymology, to draw out from the Hebrew, probably is just the word like Thutmose. So I don't think so first of all, all those characters I wouldn't, from a historical standpoint, I wouldn't group them together. I think there probably was a David and a Solomon, not the stories obviously that are told about them necessarily. Again, that's a very specific aspect, I think, of Old Testament studies. A friend of mine, Andrew Knapp, Knapp, wrote his dissertation on apologies, and he's looking at Hittite apologies, and then sort of, I think he was comparing them to like Davidic apologies. But yeah, I mean, a really good book to talk, actually, something that was published recently. What is the title? It's a new edition of the book, but it's by Lester Grob. Like Israel, what do we know and how do we know it, or something like that. It's on my shelf. I could go grab it, but yeah, I think that is going to lay out in an introductory way. I think a lot of because it's current, lay out a lot of the issues that the things that are debated, I suppose. And I just noticed Skeptical Christian wrote something here that referring to good sources even when they're not in agreement with him. I really appreciate that. So I mentioned this before, but oh God, Richard, I'm really sorry. So he just commented that I'm picking at my nails. It's one of the wonderful side effects. Anyway, sorry. I'm sure everybody, now that I think about it, everybody's probably hearing that. I apologize, everybody. So I mentioned this before, and it's, the book of Daniel, consensus is that it's written in the 2nd century. I don't know that you can get away from that. There definitely are scholars that will hold to an earlier date, but let me read something to you. It'll take a second to pull it up. Maybe I'll continue to talk while I pull it up. But there are definitely what I consider to be great scholars in biblical studies and ancient Near Eastern studies that would hold. There are not many, but that would hold to an early date. The problem is that I think that they often do so because theologically they're, I don't want to say backed into a corner, but I don't think that's fair, but that they, well, I'll just read this to you. So as I find it, for the bibliography, yeah, okay. So, right. Okay. Before I read it, so there are definitely sources if you want to see what are probably the better arguments, the stronger arguments for an early date. Some of the sources that you can look at, and again, I don't agree with them, right? And they're, well, Tremper Longman III, it's what I'm getting ready to read, is one of the commentaries that talks about this. He doesn't go into a great deal of depth in his commentary, but I think he's a great scholar. Stephen Miller put out a commentary, 94, maybe. I get bad with the dates. I thought it was in the early 90s. And of course, who was it? I think it was David De Silva put out a fairly scathing review of Stephen Miller's commentary. And David De Silva is a Christian. And basically saying, this is not that this is an apologetics. This is an apologetics commentary, and this is not the way to go about doing this. But I think if you want to look at the stronger arguments, somebody more recent, Stephen Anderson, a good friend of mine, wrote his dissertation on Darius the Mede, thinks he's Cyaxares II. But published his book, self-published it, and then he's written some articles, 2015, 2016 maybe, looking at, for example, what's the article I was looking at? I think he's looking at the use of Herodotus to talk about the contemporaneity of Cyrus the Great and Darius, from one of the comments. And again, I disagree, and I think if you read Boyeux, you'll see a much better explanation of the text. But nonetheless, so those are some places that I think you can go. Tremper Longman's, it's in the NIV commentary series. He again, Stephen Miller, can't remember the series that's in. Stephen Anderson, you can download that PDF for free, his dissertation, a publication of his dissertation, and I think you can probably download some of his articles for free as well. And then they're going to give lots of bibliographic resources there. I think Kenneth Kitchen, there are some aspects of his analysis of the Aramaic that are good, others that aren't. Stefanovic wrote on the Aramaic, and I think there are some problems with some of the things that Stefanovic says. You can read the critique, the review of his work by John Collins. But there are resources out there. So if you're making arguments for an early date, there are people that are making better arguments. I think again, I don't think they hold up, but but let me read to you something here. So this is in the intro to Tremper Longman's commentary on Daniel, and he's talking about this difficulty of early date, late date, and the debate. The conundrum is that faithful interpreters find themselves on two sides of the debate. On the one hand, there are those who believe it is necessary to stick to a 6th century composition. Others feel that the text drives them to a 2nd century date. And if they believe that the Bible is the Word of God, they must then struggle with the theological issue of a book that, at least on the surface, attempts to deceive its audience into thinking it is prophesying future events. Oops. Good grief. Come on, Josh. Sorry, I just swiped. Damn it. Okay. It is prophesying future events when in reality it is casting the past into a future sense. Into a future tense. One attempt to get around this conundrum is to point to the well-established use of pseudonymity in the ancient Near East. Sorry, it's hard to see. And he talks about that. This should not, next paragraph, however, obscure the extent of the difficulties of promoting a 6th century date. The historical problems in the first part are real, and the solutions to some we can only speculate about. See commentary. Moreover, there are problems that need to be addressed at the end of chapter 11, when the prophecy appears to fail. We will provide another explanation than a late date at that point in the commentary, but we will not glibly push the problem under the rug. These are difficult issues that will divide faithful interpreters for years. We must resist the temptation to turn this issue into a simple litmus test. Some argue that anyone who holds to a 6th century date is a hopeless fundy who refuses to look at the evidence. Others will brand those who opt for a 2nd century date as liberals or compromisers. I know that there will be reviewers of my work and approach who will view me as soft-minded or soft-hearted on this issue. But I argue that it is an unhelpful simplification to categorize on the basis of someone's conclusions on this matter. At the very least, we need to look at the motives and arguments behind the conclusions, as well as the treatment of the text in the light of the commentator's conclusions on the date of the book. That's leading up to what I'm getting ready to quote here. In view of the evidence, and in spite of the difficulties, I interpret the book from the conclusion that the prophecies come from the 6th century BC. I find the problems amenable to hypothetical solutions, and the theological issues of a late date difficult to surmount. He goes on to talk about, but that statement, I find the difficulties amenable to hypothetical solutions. So things like it's possible that Nabonidus married, like Neriglissar married a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, and therefore became Nebuchadnezzar then became the grandfather of Belshazzar, right? And so you can read Alan Millard, you can read DJ Wiseman on this issue, and what they'll say is we don't have any evidence for that, but it's not impossible. So you have these sorts of things that are going on. Another example in Daniel 1:1, the verb vayatzar, tzor, to lay siege, to besiege something. Wiseman argues, well, it could mean to just treat as an enemy, right? And so it's possible, that is possible, that it's used to treat as an enemy. And so if that's the case, then you don't have to actually have Nebuchadnezzar besieging it. He could be just sort of passing by it. And we know that he's in the general region. And so, that could answer that. That's a possibility. Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. So Longman is saying, even in spite of these difficulties, which I believe are amenable to these hypothetical solutions, and because the theological hurdles that he would have to jump in order to adhere to a 2nd century date, because of those two things, it's possible that these hypothetical solutions can work, and it's theologically too difficult, in his opinion, to hold to a 2nd century date. Because of that, he holds to a 6th. But then he goes on to say there are really good Christian scholars that hold to a 2nd century date. He cites Golden Gay and some others, but Chung Leong Seau would be one. But I guess that's what I would say about one of the reasons that I struggle sometimes in this discussion, because in my opinion, I don't think it's the liberal or the critical scholars that have this bias that drives them to manipulate the data. I think by Longman's own admission, it's not that he's manipulating the data. I think that what he's doing is he's looking at the data and saying, is it possible that this can answer the question? Yes. If that's possible, then because of the way that I understand the biblical texts from a theological standpoint and the problems that would come about from a 2nd century date, I'm going to go with the 6th. That, and he's admitting, like he's owning the bias, which I think is phenomenal, right? I wish everybody would do that. But because of that, I think the bias is actually more on the other side. But that was a really long answer to something that I don't know anybody actually asked. Sorry. Okay. Man, I really wish it would stop doing that. I know I keep saying it, but I start to scroll down and then it jumps to the bottom. Okay. Brian Stevens, can you make a full review of the Bible and do it in one video take? No problem. No problem at all. It'll be up tomorrow. Thank you, Brian. Okay, Jonathan Yance. I've heard the city of Jericho is the oldest city in the Levant. Oldest city. I mean, it's old. Yeah, I'm not a Palestinian archaeologist. So Jericho definitely has incredibly early layers. But yeah, I wouldn't know what the oldest city is. That's a good question. Jericho, of course, is interesting because when Kathleen Kenyon dug it, it was very problematic for a particular view of the Old Testament of the Hebrew Bible from a historical standpoint, and so there have been people. Bryant Woods, is that his name? From Toronto, wrote his dissertation on the pottery sequence. I think from the 15th century, arguing that it actually, could be that the walls of Jericho fell, and he's got a video out that has some animations that I think it's been pretty heavily critiqued, but nonetheless, yeah, Jericho's problematic, right? I is problematic. Yeah, but the thing is, I say this all the time here and on Skylar's channel. I think people that hold to a particular view of inerrancy or a particular hermeneutical approach to the biblical text, those things, those types of historical problems, sort of untangle the web. And I don't think it necessarily needs to. I think that there are other hermeneutical approaches that you can take to the biblical text that allow. I don't necessarily think that ultimately they're right, but nonetheless, I think they're. If I were going to hold to a theistic Christian perspective, that would be the one that I would hold, because I think it allows the data to stand as it is. So, Pinball 1970. On the subject of David, Solomon, and supporting archaeology, are you familiar with Israel Finkelstein's work? Is he fringe? Unearthing the Bible? A little. I don't think Finkelstein would be considered fringe at all, but don't quote me on that. Again, biblical archaeology, it's not really what I do. But what are some sources? If you email me for some secondary literature, it would take me a few minutes to go back through my notes. But I could probably, I can definitely get you. And if I can't get you sufficient bibliographic sources, I know several people that are in biblical archaeology, and I can, I can definitely get that information. Good question. Injustice System. I find it difficult to read the Bible on its own. Can you recommend a Bible with an accurate historical? Recommend a Bible with accurate historical commentary that explains each book or chapter accurately as you read through. A Bible. I haven't read from an English Bible in a while, so I don't know that I can. What I would say is that something like give me 20 seconds. Can somebody hum the Jeopardy theme song? Oh, I'm gone. 20 seconds. Did you do it? Did you guys? Who hummed it? Just kidding. So some books that I think are excellent for what you're talking about. I've mentioned it already on the stream, but now I can just show it to you guys. So John Collins, his third edition of Introduction to the Hebrew Bible. I think this is an 18 publication. Yep, 2018. It's a Fortress Press. But what he does is he goes through, gives a good introduction to the introduction, talking about a variety of different issues in the biblical text as a whole. But then he goes through and talks about all the different books, the different genres that they're in, aspects of dating and authorship, that sort of thing. And then he'll go through and sort of in broad strokes talk about the main issues in the different books, and then he gives bibliography, really good bibliographic, up to date, obviously, sources that you can, if you want to do further reading. Another, I think, good work, Thomas Dozeman, another Fortress Press publication. This one's 2017. The Pentateuch, Introducing the Torah. You can see, fantastic volume. So he is going to go through, the different aspects of authorship, redaction, those sorts of things. He gives outlines to the books, different interpretive, hermeneutical approaches. But these types of books, I say, would probably be better suited for what you're looking for, I think, because I think it's much easier to just right there on the page have some commentary or something. But I would say probably something like that would be better, in my opinion. Richard Madsen, I'm a huge fan of Digital Hammurabi. Seen every show for about 2 years. Very serious, educational, intelligent, mainstream. Richard, thank you. That is incredibly kind. I have to get back on your show. We just have to do that. ENG 613 loved the Daniel series. Giddy up. Giddy up. Thank you very much. We're almost done with it. I think the last video is going to be good too. Okay. So English 613 again. I don't know if it's English, but ENG 613. Do you actually know more about the Bible than Jesus? Nope. That's it. And I don't even know that. So, Iron Charioteer. Pine Snake, what's Jeopardy? Starting to sound like me. Is there a way to check your sub count real time? I think so. I have an app. Let me look. 998. We are 2 away. So if there are 2 people that are listening that haven't subbed to the channel, we are 2 subscribers away from 12,000. So yeah, if you haven't subscribed, love for you to subscribe. We have a lot of good content that comes out. And while you're at it, if you haven't subscribed to the Skylar Fiction Show, if you enjoy hearing me drone on like this, hopefully I'm not doing that. We have a lot of fun over on Skylar Fiction Show, and Skylar's a lot of fun just himself. So yeah. So thank you guys very much. Well, we've been going a little over an hour, and I think we've possibly run out of questions. Guys, this has been great. I'll wait a couple more minutes. If anybody has any questions, haven't had a lot of Daniel questions, which is interesting. If you have some, that's the thing I'm most currently read up on. So I gotta stop scratching my nails. Sorry, doing it again. Are sock accounts cheating? Yeah, I don't know. It'd be nice if Tony Design says no, it's not cheating. But I hope we're putting out content that is desirable and useful. So yeah. Yeah. Oh, there's a subscriber. Be mindful. So ostensibly, I didn't see the other ones come up. I guess they're supposed to come up in the stream. So we're at 999, 11,999. One more will push us over. Or I guess push us there. Okay. So 123 Goober P. So what was the most interesting new thing you learned from researching your Daniel series? That's a good question. Well, I'm sorry. There are lots. I'm trying to think of the most interesting one. Gosh. I think I have always wanted to know, in more detail, the history of the Maccabean period. And, this is one of the things that you kind of, have to do it, but it's really useful to do it. One of the things that you see showing up, spoiler alerts, but one of the things that you see happening in these visions is that they all sort of terminate with Greece, right? And mostly with Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. And, this becomes very prominent in chapter 11. But one of the things that's really neat, and I'll talk about this in the video, is that in Daniel 9, 24 to 27, that really highly debated section where people throughout history have utilized it to talk about their particular time period. The language there that is used, some of the verbiage that's used, I think pretty conclusively ties that section to the other visions. And 24 to 27, Daniel 9 is fairly vague. Just in general, it's fairly vague. Daniel 8 is a fairly specific prophecy, much more specific than, say, like chapter 7. Chapter 11 is incredibly detailed. Incredibly detailed. I mean, as far as the visions are concerned, it's fairly detailed. And so, but I think looking at how each of the visions sort of terminates with Greece, and then watching how later interpreters, noticing that the kingdom of God has not come, do almost exactly what Daniel, the writer of Daniel, did in Daniel 9. So if you think about Daniel 9, the text begins with Daniel reading through ostensibly Jeremiah 25, Jeremiah 29, maybe Leviticus 26. But he's reading through these texts that talk about the 70 years of captivity. You see it in Zechariah 1. And basically he's, the story is setting it so that he says, wait, why hasn't all this stuff ended? We're right at the end, theoretically. And so he begins to pray and, confesses the sins of, Israel and how they've been unfaithful, and that God would restore the land. And this is one of the reasons I think that interpreters think that he has Leviticus 26 or Deuteronomy 28 in mind, is because it's sort of following that blessing and cursing pattern. But nonetheless, he's looking at that, and then the angel Gabriel comes down and says, it's actually not 70 years, but 70 weeks of years. And so reinterpreting, it's sort of a colloquial way to say that, it's not anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll talk about it in the video a little bit, but developing like one of the hidden meanings in the 70 weeks. I mean, in the 70 years, it's actually, Jeremiah wasn't talking about 70 years, it's 70 weeks of years is the implication. And you see this in later writers who will say, it actually wasn't Greece. Daniel didn't really get the full revelation, right? There was this hidden meaning that he didn't know. And actually the fourth kingdom is Rome. And so again, developing this idea in light of what events have actually taken place. So Tim Smith asks, what are our plans for Christmas? Not much. I think we're just going to kind of relax, stay local. The MS has been bothering me a fair amount recently, and so I think just kind of hanging around here would be really nice. So thank you. Yeah. Okay, Digital Hammurabi. This is ENG 613. On the three guys saved from the fire, what was up with that? Don't remember their names. So their Babylonian names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael. I think were their three Judahite names. But yeah, so there's actually a Babylonian background to that. It's at least arguably a Babylonian background to that. Boyu wrote an article, the Babylonian background to Daniel 3 in the fiery furnace or something like that. But yeah, there's a lot of work that's been done on that. So yeah. You are very welcome, 123 Guru P. Yeah, it's the Maccabean period there's a recent book that's come out. I'm going to say that there's a recent book that's come out on this, come out on that, but that in the early chapters kind of goes through in some detail that in a really nice way goes through the historical period. So yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much. Let me just check in real quick and see if we hit that 12,000 even. You guys are fantastic. 12,000 subscribers. Thank you so much, all of you. It's fantastic. And again, if you haven't subscribed yet, I think it's worthwhile doing so. If you wouldn't mind going over there and clicking. And again, I know I say this a lot, but I spend a lot of time on Skylar's channel, and we have a lot of fun over there. And if you feel like my sort of dry sense of humor, it shows up a lot there, and I get to relax over there. It's funny. People might think that going over there, on his channel, a couple of days a week or whatever is actually stress. It's not. It's sort of like having a cold beer at the end of the day. I don't have to run the thing. I don't have to keep the conversation going. I can really mute if I want to, and just kind of come in when I want. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, go over there and sub if you want to. Okay, I'll stop talking about that. But guys, thank you so much. I've really had a lot of fun with this. It's been very relaxing. Surprisingly, you guys made it fun. So we had roughly 50 people watching all the time, and we have 45 likes. Like, this is the only channel, and I'm sure it's not, but it seems like our audience is amazing on this channel. However many people we have watching, we almost always have that many likes. So I really appreciate all of you. If you haven't liked, obviously, it'd be really helpful if you could. But and I will Skeptical Christian said he'll unsub for 5 minutes just to stir things up. I appreciate that. But no, I think you guys are fantastic, and we always appreciate our audience, and you guys are phenomenal. So thank you all very, very much. All right, guys. Well, until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?